My name is Dirk Vance, and I'm 38. If you move in Chicago's upper crust, the name Vance is no empty name. It conjures images of gleaming glass and steel skyscrapers piercing the clouds, charity balls where a handshake can seal a multi-million-dollar deal, and a penthouse on the shores of Lake Michigan that makes the city seem like a toy. I'm the eldest son of Richard Vance, a titan of the construction industry, the man who sculpted this city in his image. Officially, I'm the lead architect at Vance Constructions, the brains behind the company's most ambitious projects. Unofficially, I'm the keeper of the flame, the sentry who guards our family's impeccable reputation. I'm standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of my 92nd floor office. Below me, Chicago lives its life. Yellow cabs snake along the avenues, billboard lights reflect in the dark waters of the river, and I feel a familiar emptiness tightening in my chest. I was not taught to complain. Pity is the currency of the weak, my father used to say. But today, there is something in the air. Something that makes me look back at the path that brought me here, to the pinnacle of power, responsibility, and deafening loneliness. The Vance family. To outsiders, we are a monolith. My father, Richard, a man with an iron grip and eyes the color of frozen steel, built his empire from scratch, disdaining nothing and no one. My mother, Eleanor, with her porcelain skin and impeccable taste, turned the Vance name into a brand, synonymous with elitism and success. They are the perfect couple, powerful, untouchable. But I, more than anyone, know that the facade hides deep cracks. I grew up in a world where everything was calculated, from the angle of your napkin on the dinner table to the intonation with which to greet a senator. As the eldest son, I was taught one word from childhood: responsibility. I sat in boardrooms while my peers played football, nodding sagely, although I barely understood what was said. Dirk, you are the backbone of this family. If you crack, the whole thing will fall, my father would say. And I held this structure. Day after day, year after year. It became as natural as breathing. And then there's Ethan, my little brother. Oh, Ethan. Just the mention of his name makes me laugh and sigh. He's 29, and he's the embodiment of rebellion. If I'm a carefully engineered skyscraper, Ethan is a hurricane, tearing everything down. He's handsome, charming, and has a smile that could melt glaciers. But Ethan doesn't care about responsibility or family, or, it seems, himself. He lives like there's no tomorrow. Bohemian parties, risky art projects that always fail, and fleeting crushes that I've long since stopped following. Our parents guard Ethan like he's a fragile jewel that needs to be protected from his own mistakes. He's young, my mother often says, her voice soft but firm. He'll find himself. But I know, and deep down she knows, too, that Ethan is more than just young. He's broken, or maybe he was never whole. I remember running around the lawn of our country house in Lake Forest as kids. I, the serious older brother, was always trying to keep Ethan out of trouble. One time, he broke an expensive sculpture our father had brought back from Japan. I took the blame. Our father locked me in my room for 2 days. Ethan just grinned that trademark mischievous smile that I both loved and hated. "Thanks, bro," he said, and ran off to play. At the time, I thought I was protecting him. But now, looking back, I wonder if I raised this monster of irresponsibility. My parents' favoritism toward Ethan is an old wound that festers, but I've learned to live with it. When I graduated with honors from Yale, my father just nodded and said, "Okay, Dirk." I didn't expect anything less. But when Ethan dropped out of a prestigious art school yet again, my mother hugged him and said, "It's okay, honey. It wasn't yours then." I'm not jealous. At least, that's what I tell myself. But somewhere deep inside, I feel unfair. I've done everything right my whole life, kept the Vance family flame alive. But it never seems to be enough to earn the warm, loving gaze my parents reserve for Ethan. In the midst of this ordered chaos, I have Maya, my wife. Maya is the light that shines through the steel and concrete of my life. She is 36 and an investigative journalist for one of Chicago's leading publications. Maya does not belong to the glittering world of the Vances, and that is precisely why I love her. We met 7 years ago at a press conference to open a new cultural center I was designing. I remember her walking into the room, wearing a simple but elegant black dress, with her chestnut hair pulled back into a messy bun and a penetrating gaze that seemed to see more than anyone else. She asked me the most awkward and intelligent question of the evening. about the ecological footprint of the construction. I was fascinated. Maya is smart, insightful, and, most importantly, grounded. She is not caught up in the drama of my family or blinded by the glitter of the Vance name. To her, I'm not Dirk Vance, heir to an empire. I'm just Dirk. A man who sometimes gets tired, sometimes doubts himself, but always tries to do the right thing. Maya is the only person I can share my deepest thoughts with, the fears I wouldn't dare admit to anyone else. She listens without judgment and gives me advice that's as sharp as a scalpel. Last week, Ethan caused another stir. He invested a huge amount of the family money in a promising contemporary art show that failed miserably, leaving a trail of debt and angry creditors in its wake. I had to spend days cleaning up the mess, negotiating, paying off the late fees. My parents, as usual, just sighed and told me to look after my brother. I wanted to scream, to ask them why I always had to clean up after Ethan. And in moments like these, Maya is the anchor that keeps me from going crazy. But when Ethan called me this morning, his voice was different. It wasn't the usual confident, evasive tone I was used to. There was a tremor in his voice, a panic I'd never heard from him before. "Dirk, I need to see you. This is serious." The words echoed in my head as I sat in my office, watching the clock tick slowly by. I didn't know what kind of bomb he was about to drop on me, but my gut told me it wasn't just another dad or a drunken stunt. As I was about to leave the office to meet Ethan, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, Eleanor. Her voice was icy, as if she were holding back a storm. "Dirk, come home tonight. We need a family meeting. This is important." No explanation, no hint of warmth. My chest tightened. A call from my mother in that tone could only mean one thing. It was about Ethan. I answered curtly, "Yes, Mom," and hung up, feeling like a soldier preparing for battle. I drove to Lake Forest, the familiar route from downtown Chicago to the family estate seeming longer than usual. The lush trees lining the road, the crimson sunset reflected in the lake. It was all picturesque, but I couldn't enjoy it. Questions swirled in my head. What had Ethan done? What kind of scandal was this? And why had my mother called a family meeting? I texted Maya, letting her know I'd be late and might need her support that evening. She didn't ask questions, only told me to drive carefully. Her trust was a lifeline in this sea of uncertainty. I knew she'd be waiting when I returned, ready to listen and help me sort things out. But first, I had to enter the lion's cage. My own family. It was dark when I arrived at the Vance estate. The huge Tudor Gothic mansion, with its dark beams and stained glass windows, glowed warmly from within. The butler, Mr. Henderson, opened the door for me with a polite smile, but his eyes were worried. "Master Dirk, everyone is waiting for you in the great drawing room," he said, almost in a whisper. I nodded and stepped inside, immediately aware of the heavy, oppressive atmosphere. My father, Richard, sat in his huge leather chair by the fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes sharp as a blade. My mother stood by the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her dark blue silk dress accentuating her imperious posture. And Ethan, he sat on the sofa, hunched over, his head down, his hands clasped together as if he were trying to keep himself from falling apart. No one spoke as I walked in, but their looks said it all. There was a storm coming. "Dirk, sit down," my father said, his voice low but commanding. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and tried to maintain a calm demeanor despite the chaos raging inside. "What's going on?" I asked, looking from my father to my mother, then to Ethan. He didn't look up, just muttered something unintelligible. My mother took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "Ethan has something to tell us," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "And we need your help, Dirk." As always, the words cut like a knife, not in their meaning but in the way she emphasized "as always." I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down, nodding for them to continue. Ethan finally looked up, his eyes red, as if he'd been crying or up all night. "Dirk," he began, breathless. I'm being blackmailed." I blinked, processing the information. Blackmailed? By whom? For what? My mind was already racing. A gambling debt? Compromising photos from another party? Anything was possible with Ethan. "A woman," Ethan whispered. "Her name is Clara. Clara Jennings. She's my ex." My father set his glass down on the table with a thud that sounded like a gunshot. "What does this woman want?" "Money," he growled. Ethan nodded. "A lot of money. $500,000. The amount was significant, but not catastrophic for our family. I didn't understand why it had caused such panic. What is she blackmailing you with, Ethan? I asked, my voice level but my insides clenching. Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, seeking support from his mother. It's about that incident, he muttered. 5 years ago. Remember that accident? The blood drained from my face. Of course I remembered. 5 years ago, late at night, Ethan, dead drunk, crashed his sports car. He was unhurt, but he hit someone on the side of the road. Then his father brought in all his lawyers and problem solvers. The matter was hushed up. The public was told that Ethan had lost control of the car on a wet road. The victim's family was paid a generous settlement and a non-disclosure agreement. I thought the story was buried forever. She claims she has evidence. Ethan continued, his voice breaking. A witness our lawyers couldn't find back then. Someone who saw me drunk. She's threatening to go to the press. She'll destroy me. She'll destroy the family's reputation. I looked at him, searching his eyes for some remorse for what he'd done back then, but all I saw was fear for his own skin. My mother spoke again, her voice cold and calculating now. We can't let this happen. A scandal of this magnitude, it would undermine everything we've built over the years. Richard, our shares. My father interrupted her, his eyes fixed on me. Dirk, he said, his voice brooking no argument. You handle this. Find this woman. Pay her. Make sure she's silent forever. You've always been good at controlling things. I wanted to protest, to tell him that I was tired of cleaning up Ethan's mess, especially this bloody mess. But I couldn't. The family's reputation, the Vance name. It was a burden I'd carried my entire life. I simply nodded, like an automaton. Okay, I said. I'll handle it. My father looked at me, his gaze softening a little, but he said nothing. Ethan kept his head down, as if he realized he'd just dumped another ton of his problems on me. As I left the estate that night, my mind was foggy. Blackmail? The car accident 5 years ago? I drove back to Chicago feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. When I walked into our apartment, Maya was waiting for me. She was sitting in a chair with a book, but I knew she wasn't reading. She looked up at me with sharp, worried eyes. Dirk, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I sank down on the couch and told her everything. About Ethan, about the blackmail, about the accident 5 years ago that I'd helped cover up, and about the mission I'd been assigned. Maya listened without interrupting, but I could see the analytical mind of a journalist putting the pieces of the puzzle together in her eyes. When I finished, she took my hand, her voice gentle but firm. Dirk, I know you feel responsible for your family, but this time, something doesn't add up. What do you mean? I asked, even though deep down I knew she was right. Maya always saw things I missed. This girl, Clara, Maya said. Why did she show up now, after 5 years? If she only wanted money, she would have come sooner. And $500,000, it's a lot of money, but for blackmail of the kind that could destroy the Vance empire, it's not that much. It seems like an act of desperation, not cold calculation. I frowned, her words hitting home. Maybe she just ran out of the money we paid the victim's family back then? I suggested, but even I found that unconvincing. Maya shook her head. No, Dirk. Something's wrong. Are you saying your parents want you to just pay her off and shut her up? I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. My father's plan had been simple and cruel. Find, pay, threaten, destroy. Before you do that, Maya continued, her eyes serious. You need to know the truth. Not the version Ethan told you, or the one your father's lawyers concocted. The real truth. What really happened that night? Who was the man Ethan hit? What happened to him? You need to meet this Clara, not as a Vance emissary with a checkbook, but as someone who wants to understand. I sighed, rubbing my temples. This complicated everything. My task was simple, plug the hole in the family's sinking ship. But Maya was suggesting that I dive into the icy water and see what had breached the hull. It was dangerous. It could lead to consequences I couldn't predict. The next day, Ethan gave me Clara Jennings's phone number. He passed it on to me with a conspiratorial air, whispering, "Be careful, Dirk. She's a snake." I ignored him. I called and set up a meeting. She agreed reluctantly, her voice tired and emotionless on the phone. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in a working-class neighborhood, far from the glitz of the city center. As I prepared for the meeting, I felt like I was making a deal with the devil. In my briefcase was a new non-disclosure agreement the lawyers had prepared, and a check for the first installment of the money, $50,000. It was my mandate from my father. Show her the money. Dirk, he had told me on the phone that morning. Let her know who she's dealing with. And let her know what happens if she doesn't accept our offer. His words were cold and pitiless. This was war, and I was his general. But Maya's words echoed in my head. Find out the real truth. I was torn between my duty to my family and the voice of conscience that Maya had awakened in me. I drove to the meeting not knowing who I would meet there, a calculating blackmailer or a desperate woman. And I didn't know who I would end up being at the end of this conversation, a loyal soldier of the Vance family or something else. For the first time in years, I felt like the supporting structure that had been me all my life was beginning to vibrate dangerously. Joe's was the antithesis of the world I lived in. The smell of fried onions and old coffee hung in the air. The vinyl couches were worn, the lamps dim, the fridge humming with drinks in the corner. I sat down at a table by the window, feeling out of place in my perfectly tailored Zegna suit. I expected to see a glamorous, predatory woman, the kind of blackmailer you'd see in Hollywood movies. But when the door opened and she walked in, I realized how wrong I was. Clara Jennings looked to be in her 30s. She was wearing casual jeans and a gray sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail. Her eyes were tired, with dark circles under them, and her face was frozen with an expression of chronic anxiety. She didn't look like a snake, as Ethan had called her. She looked like a person carrying an impossible burden. She came over to the table and sat down across from me, not meeting my eyes. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice quiet, almost lifeless. "Clara," I began, trying to sound as confident and authoritative as my father demanded. "I'm here to discuss your proposal. My family is prepared to meet you halfway. We're prepared to pay to make this unpleasant experience a thing of the past." I put my briefcase on the table, but didn't open it. Something about her appearance stopped me. She slowly looked up at me. There was no greed in her eyes, no triumph. Only a deep, bottomless sadness. "You think it's about money?" she asked, so quietly that I could barely hear her over the noise of the coffee machine. I frowned. "But isn't it? You named a figure. $500,000. She smiled bitterly. It wasn't laughter, more the sound of a snapped string. $500,000, she repeated. "Do you know how much a single spinal operation costs at a specialized clinic in Switzerland? How much does it cost to provide round-the-clock care for a man who can't even roll over in bed? How much does hope cost? Can you put a price on hope, Mr. Vance?" Her words confused me. I expected bargaining, threats, cynicism. But not this. "I don't understand," I said, and it was the truth. "As far as I know, my family paid a generous settlement 5 years ago." "A generous settlement?" she interrupted, her voice taking on its first iron edge. "You call that generous? Your lawyers had my parents up against the wall. They were in shock, devastated. They forced papers on them, made them sign non-disclosure agreements, threatened that if they didn't, they wouldn't get a cent and your brother would get away with it. They bought our silence, Mr. Vance. But they didn't buy my brother's health. My brother." The words hung in the air. I'd always assumed the victim was some random stranger. I'd never bothered to learn his name. "Your brother?" I asked, feeling an icy hand squeeze my heart. She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek, which she quickly brushed away with the back of her hand. "His name is Leo. He was 19 years old when your brother, drunk, in his sports car, decided that the road was his. Leo was walking home from an evening job. He wanted to be a graphic designer. He was so talented. Now he is confined to a wheelchair. And every year he gets worse. The money you paid has long since gone on medication and caregivers. And now the doctors have said there is a chance. One operation. Very risky, very expensive. But it is the only chance that he will be able to at least move his arms again." I sat there, stunned. The whole structure I'd built in my head was crumbling. This wasn't blackmail. This was a cry for help. A desperate attempt to save a life. Ethan hadn't said a word about hitting his ex-girlfriend's brother. He'd made it sound like an accident, and Clara was a vindictive bitch. I looked at the briefcase on the table. It contained money and a legal gag. My father's tools. Tools that now seemed disgusting to me. "Why didn't you come to us directly?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Why blackmail?" "Because we tried," she cried, drawing the attention of an older couple at the next table. She lowered her voice to a furious whisper. "My father called your office a year ago. They wouldn't even connect him with your father. The secretary said the matter had been settled 5 years ago and hung up. We're a closed case to you. Trash that was cleared out of the way. Blackmail is the only thing that made you pay attention to us." The only language you Vances understand. She stood up, her hands shaking. I don't want your dirty money, Mr. Vance. I want your brother to look my brother in the eye. I want justice. But since there's no justice for the likes of us, I'll take what's going to keep Leo alive. You decide. She turned and walked out, leaving me alone at the table with my briefcase full of lies and the bitter taste of truth in my mouth. Part 6. I returned to my gleaming office, but its walls were closing in on me. The view of the city from the 92nd floor no longer seemed like a symbol of power. It seemed like a symbol of the gulf between my world and Clara Jennings's. I canceled all my meetings. I just sat and stared out the window, turning her words over in my head. Can you appreciate hope, Mr. Vance? I told Maya everything that evening. She listened, her face growing more serious. She was not surprised. It was as if she had known all along that there was more to the story. I thought so, she said quietly when I finished. This changes everything, Dirk. My father wants me to shut her up, I said, feeling devastated. He's called 3 times already, asking how the meeting went. I lied. I said everything was under control, that she took the money and would sign the papers soon. You can't do this, Maya said firmly. You can't be complicit in this. You have to know everything. Every detail of that night. There was a force in her words that shook me. She was right. I could no longer be a blind executor of my father's will. I had to see the whole picture for myself. The next day, I began my own investigation. It was not easy. The Vance Constructions archives were a fortress. But I was the eldest son. I had the keys. I told security that I needed files on an old property, and under that pretext, I was given access to the legal archives for that year. I spent several hours sorting through dusty folders. And I found it. The Ethan Vance accident file. It was a thin folder, too thin for such a serious matter. And it was an official police report that referred to loss of control on wet pavement. No mention of alcohol. There was a copy of the agreement with the Jennings family, signed by their lawyer, a man who, I later learned, had been recommended to them by my father's lawyers. And there was a medical report summarizing Leo Jennings' injuries as severe but stable. It was all clean. Too clean. But at the very end of the folder, I found something they must have forgotten to put away. A small piece of paper, a note from the head of security to my father. Handwritten on it. Witness, the bartender at the Fill-In, has been dealt with. The footage from the CCTV outside the bar has been lost. IS car will be in for repairs tomorrow morning. All clear. My breath caught in my throat. The Fill-In. It was only 2 blocks from the accident site. This was proof. Proof that they hadn't just covered up the case. They had destroyed evidence. They had committed a crime to cover up another crime. My hands were shaking as I photographed the note with my phone. I felt like a traitor, but at the same time, I felt like I was doing the right thing for the first time. My next step was to find the bartender. That was harder. It had been 5 years. But I had resources. I hired a private detective, not one of the guys who worked for my dad, but a quiet, unassuming guy I trusted from past cases unrelated to the family. I gave him the bartender's name and the name of the bar. While the detective worked, I did the thing I dreaded most. I drove to the halfway house on the outskirts of town, the one where Clara said her brother was. I didn't know what I'd say. I just had to see with my own eyes the aftermath of what my brother had done and what my family had covered up. I walked into a hall that smelled of antiseptic and hopelessness. I asked the front desk where I could find Leo Jennings. The nurse pointed me to a room at the end of the hall. I walked slowly, each step echoing in my chest. The door was ajar. I peered inside. A thin figure lay on the bed, under a sheet. Next to him, in a wheelchair, sat a young man. He was pale, his cheeks sunken, but his eyes were alive. He was looking at the laptop screen on his special bedside table, trying to draw with a sophisticated head control device. On the screen were sketches of fantastic creatures, full of detail and imagination. It was him, Leo, the talent my brother had tried to wipe off the face of the earth. I stood there in the doorway, invisible, and felt the last pillar of my old world crumble. This was no longer a story about money or reputation. It was a story about a life destroyed, and I was part of this destructive machine. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. 2 days later, a private detective called me. I found your bartender, Mr. Vance. His name is Mike Kowalski. He doesn't work at the Owl anymore. He runs a small bar in the suburbs now. I think he started doing well about 5 years ago. The last sentence rang with meaning. I thanked him and asked for the address. That evening, I drove there. Kowalski's was the complete opposite of Joe's, a seedy cafe. It was a trendy place with craft beer and dim lighting. Kowalski himself, a man in his 50s with cunning eyes, was standing behind the bar. I sat down on a stool and ordered a whiskey. I waited for the main stream of customers to ebb. When there were only a few people left, I approached him. "Mike Kowalski?" I asked. He nodded warily. "We haven't met. I'm Dirk Vance." At the mention of my last name, his face froze for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together. "How can I help you, Mr. Vance?" he asked, wiping his glass with unnecessary zeal. I put my phone with the photo of the note on the counter. "I think you know what," I said quietly. "Witness, the bartender at the Owl, has been settled. That's you, isn't it?" He went pale. His hand stopped moving. He looked at the note, then at me. There was fear in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. "Don't, Mike," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not the police, and I'm not going to accuse you of anything. I just want the truth. The whole truth about that night. What did you see?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around the empty room. "They will destroy me," he whispered. "Your father's men, they will not touch you. I guarantee you that. But if you keep quiet, I will make sure this note and the information about your sudden wealth gets to the right place. The choice is yours." It was a bluff. Partially. But it worked. Mike sighed heavily and gestured for me to go into the back room. There, among the cases of beer and bottles, he told me everything. He told how Ethan Vance had been sitting in his bar for hours that night, downing double scotch after double scotch. He was with a girl, and they were arguing. Then Ethan stormed out of the bar in a rage, got into his car, and drove off, tires screeching. "He was a mess," Mike said, looking at the floor. I thought, this is not going to end well. Then, half an hour later, 2 men showed up at the bar. 2 men in expensive suits. My father's men. They asked him questions, then made him an offer he couldn't refuse. $50,000 in cash and the advice to forget he'd seen Ethan Vance that night. They said it was just a little misunderstanding, Mike finished. They said the guy had just scratched the car. I took the money. I had debts, a sick wife. I convinced myself it was no big deal. I listened to him and felt a cold rage boiling inside me. Rage at my father, at Ethan, at our entire lying system, and at myself, for being a part of it. I left Mike to his fears and his conscience and drove back to town. Now I had the whole picture. Not just a car accident, but a malicious violation committed while intoxicated, with serious consequences for a person's health. And the subsequent cover-up of the crime, the bribing of witnesses, and the falsification of evidence. This was not just a family secret. This was a criminal case. I arrived home late. Maya was awake. I told her about my conversation with the bartender. She listened silently, then hugged me. "What are you going to do, Dirk?" she asked. I looked into her eyes. "I don't know what I should do," I answered honestly. "But I know what I will do. I'll see Clara again tomorrow. But this time, not to ask questions, but to give her an answer." I was no longer sure if I could save the family's reputation. But I was sure of one thing. I had to try to save what was left of my own soul. The next day, I called Clara again. My voice sounded different, and she must have sensed it because she agreed to meet without hesitation. We met at the same cafe. I was already seated at the table when she walked in. This time I was wearing a simple shirt and jeans. I wanted her to see me as a person, not a representative of the Vance family. She sat down opposite me, her face tense, defensive. I didn't beat around the bush. "Clara, I know," I said quietly. "I know everything. About the Owl, about the state my brother was in, about the bribed bartender, about how my people covered it up." She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. The wall of mistrust she had built around herself was beginning to crack. "How?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know the truth. And I want to apologize. Not on behalf of my family. On my own. For what we did to you and Leo. For being part of that lie. I have no forgiveness. But I want you to know that I am infinitely sorry." At that moment, she broke. All the grief, all the pain she had been holding inside for years, burst out. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. Not loudly, but quietly, convulsively, her whole body shaking. I sat in silence, letting her cry. I didn't try to console her. What words could I find? The waitress came to our table, but I motioned for her not to interfere. When Clara calmed down a little, she raised her tear-stained face. "You have no idea what it's like," she said, her voice breaking. "To watch your brother, so full of life and plans, fade away before your eyes. To watch your parents grow old, devoting all their strength to caring for him. And to know that the person who did this continues to live his carefree life, throwing parties, traveling the world. Sometimes I wanted to kill him. But then I looked at Leo, and I knew that revenge wouldn't cure him. He needed help. Real help. She told me everything in detail. About the sleepless nights. About the doctor's bills that piled up like a snowball. About the hope that came and went. About how they sold their house to pay for yet another operation that didn't work. Blackmail was their last, desperate step. The money she demanded wasn't for her. It was needed to pay for that experimental operation in Switzerland. I offered more than an apology, I said when she finished. I pulled my personal checkbook out of my pocket. Not the company's, not the family's. Mine. I wrote out a check. It was for twice what she wanted. $1 million. I placed it on the table in front of her. She looked at the check, then at me. Her eyes were puzzled. What is this? It's a start, I said. It's enough for the surgery and for rehab. And it's not the Van Cess money. It's my money. But it's not everything. I can't undo what my brother did. But I can hold him accountable. And I can make sure Leo is taken care of. For life. I'll set up a trust fund for him that will cover all of his medical and living expenses. You'll never have to worry about money again. She looked at me, speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes again. But this time they weren't tears of grief, but of relief. Why? She finally asked. Why are you doing this? Because it's the right thing to do, I replied. Because someone should have done it a long time ago. Because I can't live a lie anymore. She took the check, her hands shaking. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just take care of Leo. And one more thing. I'm going to need your help. When the time comes, you're going to have to tell your story. To my family. She looked at me, frightened. But your father? I'll deal with my father myself. But they need to hear it from you. They need to see that behind their money and their reputations there is real human suffering. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded decisively. Okay, I'll do it. We sat in silence for a moment longer. It was getting dark outside when we left the cafe. Take care, Clara, I said. She nodded, clutching the check tightly in her hand, like a life preserver. And you, Dirk. I watched her go, and for the first time in years, I felt not the weight of responsibility, but the lightness of it. Responsibility not to my family, but to my conscience. The most important battle of my life was ahead of me. The battle with my own family. And I was ready for it. Before I could stir up trouble in the Vance household, I had to meet with its epicenter. Ethan. I called him and said we needed to talk right away. He must have assumed I was bringing good news about the deal with Clara, so he casually suggested we meet in his loft, a huge space filled with canvases and sculptures that my father was paying for. When I walked in, he was mixing himself a drink and humming a trendy tune. So what, bro? He asked with a smile. Did you fix my little problem? Did that bitch take the money and crawl back to her hole? Something snapped inside me at that moment. All the pent-up rage, all the contempt I'd been building for years, came pouring out. I walked up to him and punched him in the face as hard as I could. He flew into the wall, knocking over a table of bottles. He looked at me in amazement and fear, clutching his cheek. Are you crazy, Dirk? He croaked. No, Ethan. I growled, advancing on him. I just came to my senses. Problem? You call a man's ruined life a problem? Bitch. You're talking about the woman whose brother you crippled. He backed away, his face pale. I don't know what you're talking about. It was an accident, an accident. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and shook him. You were dead drunk. You fled the scene of the crime. You let Dad and his bloodhounds bribe witnesses, destroy evidence, and silence a grieving family. Have you ever once in the last 5 years asked what happened to that guy? His name was Leo. He was an artist, just like you, damn you. Only he had talent, not Daddy's money. And now he can't even hold a pencil because of you. I threw him off me. He fell onto the couch, breathing heavily. There was no longer any bravado in his eyes. Only pathetic, animal fear. She told you, he babbled. She's lying all the time to get more money. I talked to the bartender, Ethan. I snapped. I saw the reports. I saw Leo. I saw everything. So stop lying. For once in your worthless life, stop lying. He fell silent, hanging his head. In the silence that followed, his silence was louder than any confession. He didn't deny it. Because he knew I knew the truth. What are you going to do? He asked finally, his voice shaking. I looked at him with cold disdain. At this spoiled, selfish man I had once considered my brother. Tomorrow night, at my parents' house, a family meeting, and you'll be there, and you'll hear it all from the beginning, and then you'll do what I say. Your father will destroy you, Dirk, he whispered. You're going against family. Family. I laughed bitterly. This structure built on lies and money? Maybe it's time for it to crumble, or at least rebuild on stronger foundations. A foundation of truth. I turned and walked toward the door. Just before the door, I stopped and said without looking back, one more thing, Ethan. Tomorrow is the first time you'll see Clara and Leo. I'm bringing them with me. You will look them in the eye, and you will apologize. Not to me, not to your parents, to them. I walked out, slamming the door, and left him alone in his golden cage, alone with the wreckage of his carefree life. I felt no satisfaction, only bitterness and cold determination. The brotherly love I had once felt for him was dead. In its place was a scorched field, and the need to see this through to the end. The next evening, the great drawing room at the Vance estate was tense enough to cut with a knife. My father, Richard, sat in his chair, his face an impenetrable mask. My mother, Eleanor, paced the room, her nervous movements betraying her anxiety. Ethan sat on the sofa, pale and drawn. They were waiting for me. They thought I had come to report on the success of the cover-up. The door opened, and Mr. Henderson came in. Mr. Dirk has arrived, he announced. I went in, but I was not alone. A nurse wheeled Leo Jennings into the room behind me, his hand in his, Clara at his side. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother stood still, her hand over her mouth. My father rose slowly, his eyes flashing. Ethan sank back into the sofa, not daring to look up. Dirk, what is the meaning of this? Father growled, his voice low and dangerous. It means we will not lie anymore, Father. I replied calmly, walking to the center of the room. You all know Clara Jennings. And this is her brother, Leo. The man whose life was ruined by your youngest son and your desire to preserve his reputation at any cost. How dare you bring those people here? My mother cried, her voice ringing with rage and fear. This is our home. This is a crime scene, Mother, I snapped. And it's time for the victims to testify. Clara, please. Clara stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, then grew stronger. She told everything, without emotion, just reciting the facts. About Ethan being drunk. About the accident. About the pressure from the lawyers. About the years of pain and despair. About the fight to save Leo's life. The room was so silent as she spoke that you could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel. Leo was silent, but his presence, his stillness in the chair, spoke louder than any words. When Clara finished, I looked at Ethan. Ethan, now you. He looked up at me with a hunted look. Come here, I ordered. He stood slowly and walked over. He stopped in front of the wheelchair. Look at him, I said. Look him in the eyes. Ethan slowly raised his head. Their eyes met. There was no hatred in Leo's eyes, only endless weariness. And in that moment, Ethan broke. He fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he whispered, and it wasn't pretend. It was real, hard-won remorse. Forgive me. I didn't know. I'm sorry. My father watched the scene with a stony face. Enough of this circus, he said. Take them away. They're not going anywhere, I said firmly. We're not finished. I've already arranged for immediate assistance for Leo. But that's not enough. I demand that the Vance family establish a lifetime trust fund for Leo Jennings that will cover all of his needs. I demand that Ethan be removed from all family affairs and finances and sent to work. A real job where he will learn responsibility. And I demand that the family issue a formal, if private, apology to the Jennings family. You're crazy, my father hissed. You're a traitor. You're destroying this family for these people. No, Father. I'm saving it. I'm cleaning out the rot that's been eating away at it from the inside. And if you don't agree to my terms, tomorrow morning everything I've learned, the bartender's statement, the security memo, Leo's medical reports, it's all going to land on the DA's desk. And then you won't just lose your reputation. You'll lose everything. We looked at each other, two titans, father and son. In his eyes I saw rage, shock, but also something else. Fear. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew that old Dirk, his loyal soldier, was dead. In his place stood another man. A man who had found something more important than family loyalty. Justice. The room fell silent, awaiting his decision. And I knew that whatever it was, my life would never be the same. The aftermath of that night was like an earthquake. changing the landscape of our family forever. My father didn't say a word. He simply nodded, sharply, once, and walked out of the room. It was all there, his defeat, his hatred for me, his reluctant agreement. My mother ran to Ethan, who was still kneeling, and threw her arms around him as she burst into tears. But the look she cast on me was not only grief, but also cold detachment. I had become her enemy, the destroyer of her world. I asked the nurse and Clara to wait in the next room while I went over to my mother and Ethan. "That's not all," I said quietly. "Ethan, you're going with them. You're going to spend a week with Leo at a rehab center. You're going to help. Feed him, read to him, just be there. You have to see what you've done." Ethan, surprisingly, didn't object. He just nodded silently. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his actions. In the weeks that followed, our family functioned like a machine after a serious breakdown. On the outside, everything was the same. But on the inside, everything had changed. My father had complied with my demands. The same lawyers who had hushed up the case 5 years earlier were now working to set up a trust fund for Leo Jennings. The amount was astronomical, guaranteeing Leo the best care, the best technology, and every possible medical aid for the rest of his days. Clara was able to quit her 2 jobs and devote herself entirely to her brother. The operation in Switzerland was scheduled. Ethan, as I had demanded, was stripped of everything. His credit cards were blocked, his sports car was sold, his loft foreclosed. True to his style, my father found him the most humiliating job he could imagine: assistant foreman at a construction site on the outskirts of town. Ethan had to be there every day at 6 in the morning. I don't know if this was punishment or a twisted form of paternal therapy, but Ethan complied. My relationship with my parents had become a cold war. We met for obligatory family dinners, exchanging polite, meaningless phrases. My father looked at me as if I were a stranger who had taken the place of his son. My mother avoided my gaze. I had become for them a living reminder of their failure, of the crack in their perfect facade that I had not only failed to hide, but had exposed for all to see within the family. But I did not feel regret. I felt relief. The burden I had carried all my life was gone. I was no longer the keeper of the flame of lies. One evening, Clara called me. She was in Switzerland. Leo's operation had been a success. The doctors were giving cautious but optimistic prognosis. For the first time in years, he had feeling in his fingers. "He will be able to draw again. Dirk," she said, crying into the phone. "You gave him hope. You gave him life." After that call, I sat in silence for a long time. Maya was next to me. She just took my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She was with me every step of the way. Ethan had been working construction for 3 months. He had lost weight. His hands were rough. One day he came into my office. He looked different, more mature. "I wanted to say thank you, Dirk," he said. I looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For stopping me. I was a monster. I didn't understand it. That week at the center with Leo, it changed everything. I don't deserve to be forgiven. I know that. But I'm going to try to be better." I didn't know what to say. The old wound still ached. But I could see that this wasn't an act. Something had truly changed in him. "Just live your life with dignity, Ethan," I said. "That will be enough." He nodded and left. The Vance family wasn't destroyed. It had been broken, dismantled, and now it was slowly, painfully being put back together, on a new foundation. And as painful as the process was, I knew it was the only way they had a chance of being a real family, and not just a brand. 6 months have passed. I stand by the same picture window in my office, but the world below looks different. It no longer seems alien and distant. It seems a place full of stories like Clara and Leo's. A place where architecture is not just steel and glass for the rich, but also walls that can protect or crush. Standing here with Maya by my side, I feel a peace I haven't known for years. The truth, as painful as it was, freed me. It freed me from the burden of living for reputation, for expectations. It forced me to ask myself, what is truly important? Family honor built on lies, or loyalty to yourself? I turned to Maya, her eyes shining in the rays of the setting sun. "You know," I said, "I'm leaving Vance Constructions." She smiled, as if she had been waiting for this for a long time. "And what will you do?" "I want to open my own, small architectural firm. We will do social projects, designing affordable housing, halfway houses, schools in disadvantaged areas. I want to build things that help people, not just things that add to the skyline." "That's a great idea, Dirk," she said. "And I'll help you." We'll do it together. I smiled, feeling like I could breathe deeply for the first time in years. Standing there, with Chicago in the background, I realized something. The true value of family isn't found in reputation, or in luxurious estates, or in lavish parties. It's found in honesty, in responsibility, in the ability to stand up for what's right, even when it hurts those closest to you. This story, with its conflicts, pain, and liberation, may make you think about the difficult choices in your own life. The truth does not always have to be revealed immediately, like a bomb. Sometimes it requires delicate handling, compassion, but ultimately, justice must prevail, no matter how painful it may be. And I, Dirk Vance, have learned that family is not always the first priority. Sometimes it is the flame of justice that must be kept alive, lest you yourself be burned out. Have you ever kept a secret that you knew would hurt if it came out? A secret that protected someone, a friend, a family member, or even yourself, only to realize that the truth was the only way forward? Maybe it was a small lie to keep the peace. Or maybe it was something bigger, like in my case, a choice between your family's reputation and justice for someone who was in the wrong. Was there a moment in your life when you fought to do the right thing, even if it meant hurting those you loved? What did you choose? Silence or the truth? And how did that choice change you? Share your thoughts, if you'd like. Because sometimes speaking out, even just to yourself, is a way to find peace. The peace I found here, with Maya, as the sun set over a great city.